So we have similar questions coming in from Alan, from Lloyd, from René, and from Blum. Why are your Lyngdorf subwoofers are called woofers, and why is their upper frequency so high? And matching question from Kenneth. Seems like big woofers do not create very good quality output over 100 and 120 hertz. And it's true that our Lyngdorf woofers are called BW and boundary woofers and not subwoofers because they have a very high bandwidth. So they reach very high. They have no problem to play up to 100 hertz, 200 hertz, even 400 hertz. So why is that? Well, let's look at these frequency spectrum with the channels again. As you can see, the subwoofer has to carry all the low frequency effects, and that goes up to 80 and DTS even 120 hertz. So you better design a woofer that is capable of playing up to minimum 200 hertz, so it really plays totally in its, as I say, comfort zone. So it's really not on its edge on its performance, but plays everything that can happen on the LFE channel just very, very well, without any performance limits or distortion or anything. And also the integrated amplifier is up for it. So that's only the LFE alone. And the second reason why we design our woofers to have a high bandwidth is it also has to carry all the other frequencies. So let's look at this graph very closely. The front speakers, the surround speakers, they can reach down to 20 hertz too. And even the immersive channel can reach down to 40 hertz. So if your front speakers are not huge floor stands, you have to set them to medium and small, as we just discussed before. And then the subwoofer has to play all the bass from the LFE channel and the redirected bass from all other channels, and that can be up to 16 channels. So again, can your subwoofer cope? Is the power handling good enough? Is the frequency bandwidth good enough to carry all these? Or is there a performance overload happening that the subwoofer cannot cope with it? So we design our subwoofers with a very high bandwidth, so there is no limitation in how to set the crossover frequency with whatever main speakers and surround speakers you have. It will always match and blend in very well with your front speakers. To show or look a little deeper into this, I have looked at some very typical popular subwoofers and looked at their frequency responses, either as given by the manufacturer or by some media review magazines. So let's look at some subwoofers. Not naming any names, of course. So I simplified the graphic a little bit here, but the actual frequency curve is, of course, for real, based on an actual measurement. So this first one is a typical and also common subwoofer frequency response. And to be honest, it looks a little bit like a church. And sorry to be so direct, but why is this even called a subwoofer? Its peak is around 70 hertz, but it's not really good at the sub bass below that at all. And it isn't good above 80 hertz either. So you really risk a performance gap here with your main speakers. And also, even if you ignore that and you have big floor stand speakers at the mains, it's not really good at all the low frequencies, LFE frequencies, LFE effects down to 20 hertz or even below either. So this is not really a well-performing software, to be honest. Let's look at a second example. This one is a bit better, but it still looks a bit like a Sugarloaf Hill in Rio de Janeiro. It's good around 80 hertz, but that's it. Here we have another one. This one reaches a bit higher and is a bit more rounded, so that's already one step better, but to be honest, it's still not great as an LFE because it rolls off very, very early, and it's not good for crossing over to your main speakers either, because it rolls off very early, very sharp on the other side as well. The next one, it looks much better. Here you can see it reaches, first of all, really down to 20 hertz, and then it stays fairly even. So you can first of all play all the LFE frequencies, and you can match it very well with your main speakers, with the front speakers and the surround speakers, because it has a wider bandwidth and it doesn't have this peak where it performs good and not performs well below and above that frequency. And the last one, subwoofer, which is a subwoofer which one MP40 owner recommended to me for its very high SPL. So he bought it because it has very high SPL up to 120 dB. You are right, yes, that's great, but it's still a super narrow band performance, as you can see in this measurement. And again, this is not something I was drawing up, this is the actual measurement. So it's already at minus 10 dB at 80 hertz. And remember, that's no matter what kind of front speakers you have, that's already not within the ideal specs of a Dolby LFE channel. So it's minus 10 dB at 80 hertz, and then it falls off very, very sharply. So again, I show these because to answer the original question, why are our Lyngdorf woofers and our Steinway woofers, of course, as well, are such a high bandwidth design? Well, because of that, to really make alignment, crossover with all your speakers better, and to properly reproduce the LFE channel. So that's why we call them by high bandwidth woofers, and even ditch the name subwoofers. To summarize, the ideal subwoofer setting depends on your main speakers, not only on subwoofer alone. Subwoofers have to play the LFE and the redirected bass from all channels. That's very important to keep in mind. And make sure your subwoofer is capable on both frequency ends, really reaching down to 20 hertz, ideally a little bit lower, and up to 80 hertz, ideally even 120 hertz, to really fit these specifications.